A new day on the River Naf. For centuries, fishermen plied this sleepy waterway that divides Burma and Bangladesh. It hasn't always been so tranquil. The early 1990s. A Muslim community called the Rohingyas is forced into the Naf after a campaign of intimidation by the Burmese military. 250,000 cross the river, seeking sanctuary in Muslim Bangladesh. In Burma, they're persecuted, denied basic rights like citizenship and the freedom to marry. The army burned their villages and executed them, dumping bodies on mudflats as a warning. Survivors hoped Bangladesh would offer a fresh start. They were wrong. Nyapara. This is the largest refugee camp still in operation. Handouts of basic staples are all that keeps the Rohingyas this side of starvation. Every 2 weeks, families line up to collect a fortnight's rations. There's a strict limit on how much they can have. Shahab Mia arrived in 1991. There was a time when he felt humiliation accepting charity, but that's long since passed. The family fled torture and forced labour, hoping to start a better life. But experience has taught them otherwise. His 9-year-old son Hamid was born in the camp. Denied education, he lags years behind and knows nothing of life outside. Suddenly the family doesn't seem so willing to talk. It's then we notice that we're not alone. We stop recording and move to a new location, but the Bangladeshi minders follow.
Hello, how are you?
Habib, the eldest son, suggested we meet at his workplace.
Do you go to school?
He was 7 when he arrived in the camp. Now at 22, Habib is a volunteer teacher. For the first 5 years of the camp's existence, schools weren't allowed. Educating refugees was thought to be encouraging them to stay. Even now, all that's permitted are primary level classes, but there's a desperate shortage of teachers and books. Classes are taught by refugees with no teaching qualifications.
আরাজুরি কেমি সাজুর মথুরি হাতাগঞ্জুরি হই আরারে শহরে অনুমতিনদের ক্লাস 5 এর উপরে পরিবারলা ইয়ানজুরি হই শহরে আরেকখান বিরুদ্ধে কেস মা দিয়ারে আরার কি জলদি হলে
In the class next door, one of Habib's colleagues had an even more bizarre tale of mistreatment.
তে এই অফিসার স্টাফ আমি তিনি গিয়ে আমাকে তুমি ফ্যান সাপ কেন করছো বলে হই মেডিমার শোয়ারে অনেক আরে লাঠি বসাইয়ে অনেক মারধর করছে তো রিফিউজি হিসাবে আরে কি নাই ফ্যান ফুললে ড্রেসটা ফুললে অনেক নির্যাতন করে
Most of the men in this part of the world wrap themselves in cotton lungis. Many Rohingyas complain that breaking that tradition is seen as impertinence, an attempt to rise above their lowly refugee status. But officials scoffed at the story.
না এই ধরনের অভিযোগ কেউ আমার কাছে আসেনি যে আমি ব্যান পড়েছে এবং বিধায় আমাকে বিট করা হয়েছে এই ধরনের অভিযোগ নিয়ে আসে না এবং
Mohammed Asad Uzzaman is the Bangladesh government official in charge. He denied a long list of refugee complaints, ranging from threats, bribery and corruption to arbitrary detention.
রিফিউজি ক্যাম্পে সে শান্তিপূর্ণভাবে বসবাস করবে এই অধিকার তার আছে কেউ তাকে ডিস্টার্ব করবে না অযথা হ্যারাস করবে না সেই অধিকার আছে যেটা আমরা এখানে 24 আওয়ার্স আমরা সেটা এনশিওর করার চেষ্টা করছি বা করছি
The guardians of those so-called rights are stick-wielding policemen. These are the most visible culprits of a pattern of official abuse documented over the years by credible outside agencies, including the United Nations.
Forced prostitution, allegations of extortion. Some of the refugees do manage to get out and work. The money is taken away from them. Abuses such as stealing rations that they're actually getting from the international community, from UNHCR, stealing food, stealing other non-food items such as mosquito nets that's being handed out, plastic sheeting which are very important, etc.
Refugee camps were set up in a hurry. They were never meant to be permanent. But 17 years later, they've become institutional. The money to run them comes from the United Nations, but the UN has very little control. The Bangladesh government calls the shots.
The UNHCR's work is always a challenge, and I think Bangladesh has been no exception. Yes, we've had some very difficult discussions over the past year with the government, but I also think that this has opened doors to actually review the situation and jointly come up with some different ways of looking at the situation of these 26,000 refugees, human beings.
A generation of children has been born and raised in the camps, knowing no other world. Hafaz Salilamad wanted to tell us himself that he's been beaten, jailed and harassed during his 17-year stay.
ইনো যদি নাম ধরিলে আরা ইনো যদি হইলে অনারা আগম অফিসারে যদি বুঝাইলি হয় যাইরে যদি দলের হতা হইলি তাহলে অনারা যাই ফিট দি যায় না তরন হতা হই দিয়া নদ মার চলে দিয়া নদ ধরিয়া অনারা হতা বুঝাই বলি হতা হই বলি মার চলে দিয়া নদ ধরিয়া রাশন রিফিউজ হই দি ইয়ানত দ্বারা বুক লেভেলাই দি ইয়ানত দ্বারা
Mr. Hafiz wanted me to see what life was really like inside a refugee shelter eaten down by termites. His wife and 5 children survived by begging after the government confiscated their ration book. His wife begged me to offer them poison so the family could escape this life of relentless poverty.
বেশি জুলুমত কষ্ট পাতা মাঝে লাগে আর মানুষজন যেভাবে মরে গিয়ে কোনো চিকিৎসা নাই কোনো ওষুধ নাই
Bangladesh's government has been trying to starve out refugees in the hope they'd return to Burma sooner. The strategy worked for a while. Many did go home. But 26,000 Rohingyas stayed behind, refusing to believe that Burma is any safer now than it was 17 years ago. As if life in the official camp isn't bad enough, for some refugees living down the river, conditions are much worse. There are many thousands of Rohingyas living here in Bangladesh who don't have the protection of the United Nations, and life for them is that much harder. Nestled on marshland on the Naf River is a makeshift camp of 6,000 homeless Rohingya refugees. They grouped together 3 years ago when Bangladesh launched a crackdown to round up Rohingyas living openly in the local area. Only this time, no one came to help. The squalor makes the UN camp look first class. We found Gulzar Begum and her children picking weeds, the main ingredient in their one daily meal. Bangladesh won't feed any member of this camp and won't let any outside agency do it either. Hundreds of families live in perpetual fear of starvation. For Gulzar Begum, this journey into misery began just over the border in Burma. After their land was confiscated, she and her husband were forced into slavery by the Burmese army. Gulzar watched as soldiers beat him to death for dropping a heavy sack of rice. Gulzar has 6 daughters and 1 son, but she's not sure who fathered them. Even when her husband was alive, she was raped by Burmese soldiers. It's a pattern of sexual abuse that continues to this day in the camp. Because of her experience, Gulzar forbids her eldest daughter to leave the shelter. The Rohingyas are living in filth, just a stone's throw from passing pleasure boats. At monsoon time, the water rises, inundating low-lying shelters. Water and sewage mix and flow all year round. It's a recipe for disease that's cut life expectancy dramatically short. But finally, help has arrived. Doctors Without Borders set up an emergency feeding centre to tackle malnutrition. Kenyan Moses Analo is the doctor in charge.
When we arrived, it was like one child dying every day. But once we started providing healthcare, the numbers have gone down. We get like a total of deaths, 5 to 7 for the whole camp in a month. We have women dying because of complications of delivery. We have adults dying of tuberculosis, and the children mainly respiratory tract infections are the commonest cause, and diarrhea as well.
Doctors Without Borders are winning the fight to save lives using a simple paste.
So what is that?
We call it plum peanut. It's like peanut butter made of peanuts. It has some sugar, some milk, and vitamins and some minerals. Well, I was really surprised that people are living in a place like this. It's congested, they had no latrines, the sources of water were very few and the water wasn't good.
Just getting a toilet block built was the equivalent of a major diplomatic breakthrough with the Bangladeshis.
And after you built these to make a difference to people's general health?
Yeah, it has made an improvement. At least the area is cleaner than it was before, and the flies have decreased, and we are seeing fewer cases of diarrhea coming to our clinics.
The Rohingyas are truly on the way to nowhere. Unwelcome in their land of birth, barely tolerated by their neighbours.
যদি শান্তি ও দিমি করে আন ছাড়া গদল যদি ও আই দেশ চাইম আজ যদি দিমি করে আন নছলা আইন যদি নবদ রেন দিলা যদি আর বেড়া পোয়া মারি দিলে আর বন্ধের খালে না খাইতে পাই যাবে বুঝি না মারি দিল তাই হে দেশ ন যাইম ইয়ম মা যারে মুসলমান রাজ্যে বুম মারি একবার কুরাবিল
Unless there's a sudden change of attitude by Bangladesh, the so-called unofficial refugees seem destined to rot by the roadside until they give up and go back to Burma.